Welcome to my June 11th, 2024 webinar entitled Symbolic Processing. I actually gave it a full title, Using Symbolic Processing in One's Management of Emotional Data. And as I thought about that, that seemed like that was a lot, a lot of words and a lot of words that people probably don't know. So I'm going to start with a few definitions so that we can really understand what this process is. As I was going through my notes on clients over the years, I discovered that I've been doing this for at least a decade, pardon me, even a dozen years. And it's evolved quite a bit over that time. But I was very pleased to discover that even 12 or more years ago, I was using this basic approach along with the energy work that I was trained in to help people transform, particularly the emotional content that was giving them difficulties in their lives. So let's get right into it and you know talk about what symbolic processing is. Symbolic processing is letting the mental, emotional, spiritual being tell its own story, however it wants to express it. Many of you who have worked with me have heard me say, I never know what's going to show up. And it's often rather amazing. Um, when we let our I'm going to just use the word being to represent the totality of us. When we let our being tell its own story, we get out of the way and we just let the process take its own natural, spontaneous course. And so, what comes up? Well, what comes up is emotional data, feelings, emotions, bodily sensations. It's the information that we use to know and understand our experience. Now, I call it data. I use that phrasing to help make our feelings more objective, feelings, things that we can look at or sense rather than subjective. And that comes up when we say it subjectively, we always say, I feel this, I am that, I know this, I believe this. And so we're caught up in the experience. It's very subjective. When we call it emotional data, we help to set that information in a place where we can see it. I often use my hands to gesture that it's out in front of us, where we can get a handle on it, where we can see it, and and then hence work with it. Um, so we use that as data and process with it. Um, Now, how do we do that? Well, we do it from a place that we call presence, or sometimes self in presence. It's our self that is looking at it. And when I say that, I mean that part of us that is just the silent witness of experience. When we say, I feel something, who's the I? I think something. I am the person observing my thoughts, my feelings, my sense of spiritual well being. And so we always want to come at that from that sense of the silent, uninvolved, witnessing value of our consciousness, our pure awareness is a good word for it, our inner wakefulness, that part that we call our self with a capital S, not the self that's the ego that feels, that it needs things and wants things. It's the self that is transcendent even to the needs and wants, that is just the witness of our experience. The part of ourself that we write with a small s, in Sanskrit language, the Vedic language, it's known as jiva. And jiva is just the ego in the usual sense of the word. But we're using the Vedic term understanding Atma. Atma is the self that is transcendental. It's Jiva is the individualized value of ourself, and Atma is the cosmic value of ourself. And we want to view what's going on inside of us as a witness to our experience from that level of our pure self. Atma is what we experience when we transcend even the subtlest value of thinking, so that we're just in a state of silence. And the best way to do that is through a process of transcending, such as transcendental meditation. But we can do that also with language, which I'll explain in just a moment. But again, presence is that witnessing of our experience and thought from the level. There's another term we can use. We say from the level of self, capital S self. We can call that being. The small self, you could say, is the becoming, and the large self is just pure being, uninvolved, silent witness. So, how does language help us? Those of you who have worked with me know from experience that language that we use is very powerful. It helps to transform it. It gives us the space between our awareness and what we were aware of. Language can help us differentiate between the wholeness of ourselves and the unhappy parts within us. Language can open the door to symbolic processing. Now, I introduced a new term, and that term was parts within us. It's a very useful construct to think of, oh, there's a part of me inside that worries. There's a part of me inside that's sad. There's a part of me inside that's very critical. There's a part of me that's very lonely or unhappy. Any of those parts, and there often are many parts within us. And oftentimes, frankly, they can be in conflict. There's a part of us that thinks that we're very capable, and another part that thinks we're not, that's afraid that we're going to fail and they're going to look bad if we do, or that we're going to feel guilty or ashamed, so on and so forth. So we can look at these parts that are within us and see what they need and how they may be in conflict. I was working with someone just the other day, and I swear, in one sentence, 3 different parts showed up, each expressing a different sense of who they were or who the person was, each of them trying to claim that they were the master of the person. And through our work, we were able to see those 3 parts objectively and tease them apart. It took a little doing, frankly, to be able to lay that out. Because once we laid it out clearly, then we could help the parts understand what they were trying to do and how they might possibly work together instead of being in conflict and competing with each other for attention. So the parts within us, in a sense, they are our emotional data, what we feel as emotions and bodily sensations. And the most common and important thing that parts need is attention from presence. That's what they really need. Because oftentimes they feel like they've been fighting for our attention. They feel that they're fighting against other parts to get our attention, that they're in a kind of competition that way. This is extremely common, happens in virtually everybody. And in some people, it just happens so much of the time that they feel a lack of direction. They feel like they can't think straight because every time they come up with an idea, there's another part that has a conflicting idea. You can't do that. You shouldn't do that. That would be a bad thing. You need to do other things, and so on. So they get all these conflicting messages. And it's amazing, as I said. So I was talking to a client, and literally 3 different parts showed up in one sentence of their telling me their situation. The second most common thing, first most common thing is that parts need our attention from the level of presence. The second most common thing is that parts need protection from other parts, especially those parts that are critical and judgmental of the parts that are hurting in whatever way they're hurting. And so they need protection. And so when we put attention on them, we create a space for them in which they can feel safe. Now, energetically, as I work with people, I can help to create an energetic shield to protect a part so that it can function effectively and tell us what it needs, why it's there, what its goal is, how it's trying to serve us. That's a really important point, by the way, is these parts, though we sometimes are critical of them, some part within us is critical of the other parts. Every part really is trying to do something for us, trying to serve us in some particular way. And so we just have to listen and find out, listen, look, however it wants to express it, tell us, communicate to us that it is there to do something for us. Now I'm going to pose a rhetorical question and then answer the question. Why are empathy, compassion, non-judgment, and acceptance essential to symbolic processing? Why are empathy, compassion, non-judgment, and acceptance essential to symbolic processing? As I said, it's a rhetorical question, but you've all been, well, I think most of you at least have been through this with me. People may see this on YouTube, may not have had the experience. But our inner family of parts, the emotional parts or emotional data within us, often exist in conflict with each other. Our parts often feel very vulnerable to judgment and criticism. And so we have to be with them with empathy, compassion, non-judgment. We can't try to get rid of them. We can't tell them wrong. We don't have to even rationalize their existence. We just have to accept that they're there. They're just there. And so we maintain that level of presence of just being there and having our awareness there without trying to change anything. Remaining empathetic and compassionate with acceptance and without judgment gives those vulnerable parts the space to feel protected, supported, and validated. And that's what opens the door to the spontaneous transformations that take place. From our side, we don't have to do anything. This isn't psychology. That is the practice of psychology. We're not trying to analyze. We're not trying to scrutinize. We're not giving advice necessarily, except to just show, oh, you can be that way, but you're going to be happier if you blend in with the rest. Where does the energy field work fit in? The work that I do. Energy work is extremely important in all of this because energy is contained in all the emotions we experience or don't experience, the things we don't have access to. You don't have to have an experience. A non-experience is an experience. And so we can sit with that. We can identify that. And then it's amazing what will show up. I can't make this stuff up. People get an image. Oh, there's a child and it's hiding behind a rock or under a rock. And it's behind a tree. It's in the bushes. It's turned away from us. It won't face us. It won't tell us anything. It just images like that will come. Different parts within us often have these emotions in conflict. And so one part may not show up because it's afraid of what another part is going to say or do, or laugh at it, or criticize it. So my energy field work helps to straighten those things out, create some space for the different parts to exist and to express themselves. We engage in symbolic processing in a way that allows the energy shifts to occur. We don't make them occur, they just do. And we never know how that's going to work out, how that's going to play out. So we go into it without expectation. We're just there with empathy and compassion, with acceptance. We're just there with it. So that's as how we engage in symbolic processing that allows the energy to change. As a client does symbolic processing, I work with that energy, facilitate. I often use the word catalyze. I work as a catalyst to allow shifts to occur in their energy field. And I don't make them go in any particular direction, they do it. So, who can benefit from symbolic processing? Another rhetorical question. I seem to have been on a roll here with rhetorical questions when I was writing out all of this. The answer is, of course, nearly everyone. Everyone has feelings, sometimes strong feelings and intense reactivity to things. They get triggered. Typically, our feelings overshadow our presence, our sense of self, our being. And so we're completely caught up in what's going on and we aren't able to be a witness to it. And that's why working with me, we can create that space. We can go through that process. I can guide that process so that it's successful. The feelings that come up are often in conflict, as I keep saying, which limits, even paralyzes us. Truly, we are often paralyzed by the conflict within us. We don't know which way to go. We can't make a decision. We can't even think straight sometimes. So, with all of that set of definitions and what it's all about, how do we do it? How do we do symbolic processing? Well, first, we have to clear any attachment to specific goals or outcomes so as not to constrain our process. We can have a general goal. I want to be happier. I want to be healthier. I want to be free of whatever is constraining me. But how that's going to look, we have to leave up to nature to decide. So we let go of any attachment to specific outcomes. And we say to ourselves, well, you can say it out loud when we do it. I actually encourage people to say it out loud so I know where they're at in the process. Something inside me feels, and then we put in the word or words. We could be anxious, upset, sad, angry, frustrated, lonely. And those are the negative feelings. And we also feel positive things, of course, but usually don't have to work on the positive things. It's the negative things that get in our way. Something inside me feels, and then we put fill in the blank. This feels like, and then we fill in the blank with descriptors. And many times people drop into a thing where they come up with like visual images, or they hear things, or they smell things, or touch or taste. Oh, it's hard, it's cold, like that. So it can be feeling, that kind of feeling, sensations. It feels like that. And they can elaborate on that. You know, it's rough, like sandpaper, or like coarse sandpaper, or it's rough like anything else, a file, you know. And then we can add, and I'm here with it with interest and curiosity. We let it know, we let that part know that we're here, and we're here with interest and curiosity. We care about it. We want to know more about it. Not as an interrogation, but like we're treating a friend or even treating a child, because our inner parts from that state of presence really are kind of like children. And indeed, there's a whole system, the inner family system, you know, in which the parts are often like children. So language helps us to develop the presence, which transcending also helps us develop. Being present means being compassionate, non-judgmental with whatever shows up. And sometimes things are not very, pleasant to be with, but we just accept that they're there. And we can do that because from presence, we're not moved by it. So we don't judge the feeling that we get in response. We do not concern ourselves with the meaning of the symbols that show up. This is such an important point. I'm going to say it again. We do not concern ourselves with the meaning of the symbols that show up. We don't psychoanalyze. There's no analysis. We just let the process proceed spontaneously and largely without intervention. I will sometimes ask a question or make a simple suggestion to just help people keep the process going. Um, but fundamentally, we just let it proceed. And most people, when they get into this, once they get started, it just rolls. It just flows along like a small child making up a story. I have a 4.5-year-old granddaughter who's now really good at making up stuff, really good at fantasy play, and it just rolls out. Now, not analyzing can be very difficult for people. The most difficult clients I have ever worked with are psychoanalysts, followed next very closely by psychologists, psychotherapists. Psychoanalysts are so in their head that they have to analyze everything that happens. They can just slow the process down to a snail's pace, and just they're just always analyzing, always analyzing. They come from a tradition that says that understanding, insight is the way that we bring about transformation in our psychology. They're not entirely wrong, not entirely, but it's not necessary. Insight and analysis are not necessary. We do not have to understand why we are the way we are. We only have to get how we are, how we're showing up. And if we don't like that, in what way might that change? And then we just let that happen. And we let it happen simply by holding out the parts that are within us that are in conflict or that are hurting. They're not always in conflict, but oftentimes there's usually a critic around. Pardon me for a moment. I'm going to take a drink. When we let our inner intelligence guide the process, trusting in whatever shows up, the energy bound up in the problematic, I'll use the word neurobehavior, meaning it's just the way the nervous system is working. It gets released and dissipated so that our emotional data can be utilized effectively. Shifts occur spontaneously, conflicts get resolved, the parts find ways to coexist and cooperate, and our problematic behaviors resolve. Now, while changes do occur, we still stay fundamentally the same person we always were. If we tend to be anxious, it means we tend to react, give it a neurophysiological definition in a sense. We react to certain stimuli by being worried. If we process that and we see that that part that worries needs reassurance, it needs our presence, we still worry, but that we don't get overwhelmed with worry. We just have that, oh, there's that cautionary signal. We're worried something might go wrong. And we go like, okay, what could go wrong? I'll work with that. And so we can deal with the anxiety. That's true of all the things that happen to us. I'm still a person that if I see something sad on television or in a movie, I feel really sad. I really feel that. But I'm not destroyed by that. I'm not crippled by it. I don't go around moping, for the next 24 or 48 hours about how sad that was. I may have a little thought about it, but it's nothing. It's nothing because I've learned to process that emotional data. Let me talk for a moment about some special applications and then I'll go into specific examples with clients. We can use symbolic processing in managing one's emotional data in autism spectrum things, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorders, trauma, and schizophrenia. I got to put trauma in here. I didn't have that. There. All these different kind of things. Everyone sits somewhere on the autism spectrum. That's why it's called a spectrum. Everyone experiences anxiety at times. Everybody does. And everyone has some recurring intrusive thoughts and compulsive behaviors. They may be minor, they may be a little less than minor, they may be very significant, they may be interfering with our normal function. Therefore, the content of this webinar on the management of emotional data, our feelings and reactivity, has meaning for everyone, regardless of whether they meet clinical criteria for a diagnostic label. I don't like those diagnostic labels. I've known many, many psychologists, most of whom were very quick to label people. That means that they're using a judgment. My objection to that is that they then treat the label and not the person. They kind of stop listening to the person. And they're going like, oh, there's your worrying. You're worrying. You're worrying. You know, you want some, they'll give you a pill for worry, right? So you worry less. That's not a cure. That's just masking the symptoms. Worry is a natural thing. Some people worry more than others. If it's really a problem, we can work on that and reduce that degree of worrying by developing more presence to our worrying. When I was developing this, I said, I'm going to write a thesis. And my thesis was autism spectrum, anxiety, obsessive compulsive, they call it a disorder, schizophrenia are words we use to label patterns of neurologic functioning related to the processing of emotional data. That's true in trauma too. I didn't put that in there. In fact, it's true on everything. We have emotional data. We use words, particularly if you're a psychologist, psychiatrist, to label those patterns of neurologic functioning. We even use labels like neurotypical and neuroatypical. Neuroatypical means not like everybody else or most other people, right? There's some special in a way. These are not diseases to be treated, but rather neurobehavioral traits that clients, even ones with debilitating conditions, can learn to employ effectively in personal and professional roles. They can learn how to use this. Symbolic processing changes the energy underlying the problematic behaviors. If you're autistic, you're still autistic, but you can manage your data. And autistic people generally have an overwhelm of emotional data, and they can learn to handle that. Same thing with anxiety, obsessive compulsive, trauma, schizophrenia. I'll get onto clinical cases in a moment. A couple of months ago, we dealt with autism spectrum, which is a unique spectrum. We're all on it again. Some people are more extreme than others. And we can use symbolic processing in the management of narcissism as well. The way you bring about change is fundamentally the same. It's just that people with narcissism have certain characteristics that they have to really want to look at in order to bring about change, because they tend to not want to do that. So if they decide to be, clients, if they put a commitment to themselves to modify their behaviors, particularly their sociopathic and psychopathic behaviors, then we can do things with them. But like the old joke says, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is one, but the light bulb has to want to change. So yeah, clients have to want to change. But everybody has what Carolyn Mace calls a saboteur, a certain part within them, a certain quality within them that interferes with change. It's a part that's afraid of change, afraid of dealing with stuff. And in some people, that part is very strong, very, very strong. And that's perfectly okay. Something inside me feels that it doesn't want to change. Normally, we ask the question, why? But if we don't ask the question why and just attend to the part that doesn't want to change, oh, you don't want to change. That's interesting. You know, is there more you want me to understand about that? And you observe the part and take in whatever it has to share and to offer. And then that part feels seen. It feels attended to. It feels your empathy, your compassion. It feels your presence. And that just gives it space to let the energy go, just like that. It can be done. It's very sweet. So it's important to note that we remain who we are, even as the degree of our reactivity changes. We're still reactive, but we're just better equipped to manage our reactivity from that level of presence. Okay, it's getting late, so I want to zip through a few examples of working with clients. Again, as I went through some of my notes on clients, I was amazed at the stories that people had related to me over the course of now more than a dozen years. Let's start out with one: processing dependent family relationships. I was working with a client who was very close to their parent, both their parents, and indeed to the whole family, but particularly the parents. And my client was a very capable person, and the parents were older and you might just say in decline, less able to manage things. And so the roles were beginning to shift. And one day, noticing how bent over her mother had become, my client wondered. I wrote this in the present tense. She wondered this because that's how it unfolds. My client wonders what is causing this bending. And tuning in, she feels sensations of weight in a shoulder, one of her shoulders. Pain develops in her chest. It growls, which is an interesting thing for pain. It growls and shows its claws. It's animal-like. It feels frustrated. White horses appear. They transform into unicorns, all on their own. As they are perfect, a sense of need for perfection arises. And then she and I offer reassurance to that part that it's going to be okay, that we're here with it. We're being present with it. I have to comment that this often comes out kind of choppy. You know, the sentences are sometimes short and disconnected. And that's because that's how it comes out of people. We're doing it. They're usually sitting there with eyes closed. Not everyone, but almost everyone has their eyes closed. And then something will just pop up and they'll just say it. And then there'll be a pause and then something else will pop up. So that's why the sentences often seem disconnected. We don't see what's going on between one sentence and the next because it's part of a process. And much of that either doesn't show up, you know, it's just like suddenly, oh, horses, unicorns. So there's a transformation that takes place, but it just happens. So we just report it. So that's why the sentences are kind of choppy like that. Here's another one, dealing with inflammation. We start to work and my attention goes to the client's chest where I sense more anguish than my client is aware of. Anguish seems related to her father. So I relate that to her and then she starts in. My client sees a trap door in her chest coming from a parallel universe. Wow, how's that for a vision? She senses wallowing in anguish. The trap door allows toxic waste to be dumped into her chest. It's nauseating. My client tries to create a relief valve, but the toxic waste still accumulates. I pull her out of the way and let the toxic waste pass by. I didn't physically pull her. I wasn't even in the room with her. It's a symbolic thing, kind of a fantasy, if you will. There's still a hole in her chest from her perspective, and I pull her out of the way and let the toxic waste pass by. She's concerned. I'm sorry, I said that. There's a hole in her chest, and she's afraid that the toxic waste could enter again. She wants to repair the hole. A long tube appears to suck out the waste that's inside her. She breathes deeply, her body twitches, and she has a little smile. Her chest feels lighter. She sees birds coming to repair the hole. They weave a fabric over it. She feels her energy expand well beyond her physical body. She sees animals around her, and she's at peace. Moving right along. Uh, Anxiety. Recalling a recent incident in which my client felt anxious, her shoulders and chest get tense. She feels tightness in her shoulders, chest, and stomach. The tightness drowns out all other thoughts and feelings. It floods her brain. That's frightening. I suggest that we move the flooded brain out in front of her. We just sort of go like that. That's which she can visualize. We give the poor flooded brain compassion and empathy. No analysis about why. We just offer that empathy and compassion. I bring energy to wash her brain with compassion. Her brain calms down. She says that it needs to rest. It seems happier, but my client still looks concerned and sad as though she doesn't trust feelings of happiness. I inquire. She says her brain feels calmer and happier. She smiles. Now, this again, big leap there at the end that just shifting the attention to trust, and the brain goes, oh, I'm okay. It just did it on its own. Symbolic processing. Here's an interesting one. Letting a part know that help is available. A part of my client has been oppressing other parts and feels terrified. Both. It's oppressing and it feels terrified. This part wants things to run smoothly and believes that it's the part to assure that that happens. It's the leader of the territory. It confesses that it was hurt by its experience of love. Again, just out of the blue. Hurt by its experience of love. It didn't know that help was available. It's very cautious because it doesn't want to get trapped into believing something that it currently doesn't believe. That is, things can be different. We let it know that we appreciate its vulnerability and need for safety because that's where it's at. My client offers this part a pillow. It questions whether the pillow is too ostentatious and too comfortable. My client reassures this part that being comfortable helps when one's hurt. It tears up. My client offers to sit closer. It questions this but accepts reassurance. Its worldview is changing. It starts to trust, which is something new for it. It's afraid of being laughed at. My client offers reassurance and tells the other parts to keep their distance. They understand what it means to be afraid of being hurt again. The parts say they are hungry. My client offers noodle soup. They sit down to eat together. I can't make this stuff up. It just happens that way. Um, it's late, but I want to give another example because this is one of my favorite experiences, and this goes way, way back. Um, After years of working on her experience of repeated incestual childhood sexual abuse, my client sees herself being threatened by her perpetrator. This is in her mind. Suddenly, a big, scary monster appears. Slowly, it grows larger before her. Though it becomes huge, she stays with the image. The monster stomps its feet and roars, but she doesn't panic or disappear. After a while, it deflates like a balloon, losing air and vanishes. All she had to do was be present with it. She didn't feel panic. She didn't try to disappear like she usually did when being abused, and the thing just deflates. In the next session, she again remembered being threatened. She leaves her body and floats upwards. That's her usual response. At my suggestion, she opens her eyes and moves the image away. We changed the color image to monochrome, right? It was a colored image, and then we changed it to monochrome. Um, the way I do that is I actually suggest to people that they're looking at this on a television set in color, and that in the old television sets, you could turn a knob and remove the color. It'd be a black and white image. Boy, does that go back. I bet none of you have used that. A hurricane appears in her upper abdomen. A hurricane appears in her upper abdomen. It grows larger and seems very threatening. After some time, the clouds part and the sun shines through, leaving her feeling safe and at peace. In the third session, this time without a specific memory, she sees a girl trapped in a room, unable to open the door, crying in terror. She's seeing that. At my suggestion, she turns and faces what is there. A big, scary monster appears and surrounds her. However, she is much less frightened than she had been previously. The monster grows larger, nearly engulfing her, but she stands her ground without cowering. The monster bursts and deflates, covering her with green slime. She stands in an ocean soaking up sunlight. The slime disappears and she's at peace. And then in the fourth session, anger appears as a huge dragon guarding a wonderful treasure. She steps closer. The dragon stomps its feet and roars. She comes close enough to smell its breath. She pulls the sword and plunges it into the dragon's belly. The dragon deflates. She finds the treasure, a large crystal gem, pulls it from the dragon's belly and puts it into her own heart. Light radiates from the gem, permeating her whole body. She grew and expanded out into the universe, becoming points of light comprising wholeness. And subsequently, that really was those sessions. That was the end of her trauma. She no longer felt the trauma of that abuse, that exploitation. And she was really, really transformed. It was a wonder to see. I knew her for many, many years afterwards. And she was really, really, truly free of that trauma, that PTSD, if you will. Last one, schizophrenia. Befriending the voice or voices, particularly one voice in this case. My client hears a voice inside that isn't hers. It's very dominant and critical. It has a name. Despite its critical attitude, it decides to help my client. I see a black ball below my heart. It lashes out at me. We tell it that it's okay if it lashes out. We just accept what's there. Black flames come out. It runs over and tries to hit me. The flames get bigger as the ball gets angrier. A ring of black smoke surrounds the ball. The ball turns away. We reassure it that we are curious and not trying to change it or make it do anything. The ball turns back. We thank it for that. The flames recede and a ring of smoke vanishes. The ball comes over to touch my hand. I stroke it. It looks calmer. It no longer feels hot. In fact, it feels cold. The voice, which had been like an enemy in this client who had been labeled schizophrenia, I think she just had a florid imagination. That voice becomes a friend. She learns how to work with it, and it learns to work with her. It's no longer an enemy. That voice lasted a long, long time, but it became more benevolent. She was able to function with it. So to give a quick summary, and then we'll go on to our group clearing session. The strength and magic of this approach unfolds as we allow processing to proceed spontaneously while being present. We just witness what shows up. My energy work with clients catalyzes this process, producing rapid transformation of problematic behavior patterns. This is possible because I tune into my clients, sense what they are feeling, and give their parts the attention, protection, and support that they need. My next webinar, just to put that announcement here on the recording, my next webinar will be July 9th. The webinar has a peculiar title, Then is Now. Using one's timeline. You know what a timeline is, just a thing where you say, well, I was born here and I graduated here, went to, got a job here, got married, and so on and so forth. Timeline like that. Timelines can go back into past lives. And so we can use one's timeline to heal the past and shape the future. But the meaning of the title, Then is Now, means that everything is present in this instant and only this instant. We deal with it now. We can do that because the universe is holographic. All information, past, present, and future, is here now in this present moment. I think it's going to be an interesting topic. I'm excited to put together the webinar on that. We have a question. The question is, are you suggesting we can do this process ourselves? When do we need someone like you to hold space? Just turn the words around. When you need someone to hold space for you because you can't do it yourself, then you need someone else, me, for instance. But yes, many times you can do this yourself by just asking that question or answering the question. Something inside me feels, and you fill in the blank, and that feels like, and you fill in the blank, many words and phrases, and I'm here with it. Okay? That's the answer to the question. You can do this. Anybody can do this. Sometimes the thing we're working with, if the parts are hiding particularly, I think it makes it very challenging to do it on your own. And some people do symbolic processing kind of naturally. We have to just, so to speak, sit down, close the eyes, and start. Other people need a little prompting along the way to maintain the process. It's very good to do it with someone else, but yes, you can often do it on your own, by yourself. And it can be very, very gratifying. So I encourage people to, when something comes up, try it. And if you can't manage, then, get in touch with me. Okay. So next webinar, July 9th, Then is Now. Look forward to seeing you. This works better.